Signs of the Time, Chapter 92, April the 3rd, 1879. The great controversy between Christ and his angels and Satan and his angels. Chapter 10, continued. Abraham by Mrs. E. G. White. All day he cherished the hope of meeting an angel coming to bless and comfort him, or perhaps to revoke the command of God. But no messenger of mercy appeared. Satan suggested that he must be deceived, for God had said, "Thou shalt not kill," and it was not like God to require what he had once forbidden. The second long day comes to a close. Another sleepless night is spent in humiliation and prayer, and the journey of the third day is commenced. Abraham lifts his eyes to the mountains, and upon one he beholds the promised sign, a bright cloud hovering over the top of the mountain, Mount Moriah. Now he knows it is all a terrible certainty and no delusion. He was yet a great distance from the mountain, but he bid his servants remain behind while he placed the wood upon the shoulders of his son, and himself took the knife and fire. Abraham braced himself for the sad work which he must perform. He did not murmur against God. Isaac had been given to him unexpectedly. He had received him with gratitude and great joy. And though he was the son of his old age, the son of his love, he yet believed that the same power that gave him Isaac could raise him again even from the ashes of the burnt sacrifice. He strengthened his soul by the evidence he had of the goodness and faithfulness of God. Had not he, who had graciously given Isaac to him, perfect right to recall the gift? Isaac had been a comfort, a sunbeam, a blessing to Abraham in his old age. And although this gift of God seemed so precious, so dear to him, he was now commanded to return it to the giver. The words of God commands show that he fully realized the pain which Abraham must feel in obeying his requirement. Take now thy son, Isaac, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest. Abraham wanted no witnesses. It was enough that God could look on and not only see the full consecration of his darling son Isaac, but read the heart and fully understand how severely he felt this. He wished no one but God to witness this parting scene between father and son. Abraham knew not how Isaac would receive the command of God. As they drew near to the mountain, Isaac spake to Abraham, his father, and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" These endearing words, my father, pierced the affectionate heart of Abraham. And again he thought, "Oh, that I in my old age might die instead of Isaac." Still reluctant to open before his son the true purpose of his errand, Abraham answered, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." Isaac assisted his father in building the altar. Together they placed on the wood, and the last work preparatory to the sacrifice is done. With quivering lips and trembling voice, Abraham revealed to his son the message that God has sent to him. In obedience to the divine command, he had taken the journey. Everything was ready. Isaac was the victim, the lamb to be slain. Had Isaac chosen to resist his father's command, he could have done so, for he was grown to manhood, but he had been so thoroughly instructed in the knowledge of God that he had perfect faith in his promises and requirements. The patriarch assured Isaac that his affection for him was not diminished and that he would gladly give his own life to save that of his son. But God had chosen Isaac, and his requirement must be fulfilled to the letter. Abraham told his son that the Lord had miraculously given him to his parents, and now he had required him again. He assured him that the divine promise in Isaac, "Shall thy seed be called," would be fulfilled, that doubtlessly God would raise him to life again from the dead. Isaac at first heard the purpose of God with amazement amounting to terror, but he considered the matter fully. He was the child of a miracle. If God had accepted him as a worthy sacrifice, he would cheerfully submit. Life was there, life was precious, but God had appointed him, Isaac, to be offered up as a sacrifice. He comforted his father by assuring him that God had conferred honor upon him in accepting him as an offering, that in this requirement he saw not the wrath and displeasure of God, but special tokens that the Lord loved him, in that he required him to be consecrated to himself in sacrifice. He encouraged the almost nerveless hands of his father to bind the cords which confined him to the altar. The last words of endeavoring love were spoken by the father and son. The last affectionate parental and filial tears were shed. The last embrace was given, and the father had pressed his beloved son to his aged breast for the last time. His hand is uplifted, grasping firmly the instrument of death, when suddenly his arm is stayed. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withhold thy son, thine only son from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And he said, and the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven the second time and said, By myself have I sworn, said the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withhold thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gates of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. As evidence of God's approval of faith of Abraham, he gave him the name of Father of the Faithful. The example of Abraham is recorded in the sacred history for the benefit of his believing children. This great act of faith teaches the lesson of implicit confidence in God, perfect obedience to his requirements, and a complete surrender to the divine will. In the example of Abraham, we are taught that nothing we possess is too precious to give to God. How many who profess to be Christians would follow the example of Abraham in yielding up to God his beloved Isaac? Yet our dearest treasure belongs to God. A solemn duty rests upon Christians, parents, to so educate and mold the minds of their children that they will ever have a high respect and exalted reverence for God, and for everything sacred and holy. Such will feel that God's claims must first be regarded, that nothing is too precious to sacrifice for him. Such will, like Abraham, exemplify their faith by their works. How many now who profess to believe God and pass for Christians refuse to obey his voice when he calls upon them to deny self and yield to him their darling treasures? They will hesitate and cling to earthly things. Their affections are upon the earth, the world, and the things of the world, yet some of these very ones will have the most to say about how much they have sacrificed to obey the truth. Isaac felt that it was a privilege to yield his life as an offering to God. If the Lord could accept him, he felt that he was honored. Human judgment may lay upon the command given to Abraham as severe, too great for human strength to bear. Abraham's strength was from God. He looked not at things which were seen with mortal vision, but at the things which are eternal. God required no more of Abraham than he had in divine compassion and infinite love given to man. He gave his only begotten son to die that guilty man might live. Abraham offered Isaac. Abraham's offering of Isaac was especially designed of God to prefigure the sacrifice of his son. Every step that Abraham advanced toward Mount Moriah, the Lord went with him. All the grief and agony that Abraham endured during the 3 days of his dark and fearful trial were imposed upon him to give us a lesson in perfect faith and obedience, that we might bear comprehend how real was the great self-denial and infinite sacrifice of the Father in giving his Son to die a shameful death for the guilty race. No other trial, no other suffering or test which could have been brought to bear upon Abraham would have caused such mental anguish, such torture of soul as that of obeying God in offering up his son. Our Heavenly Father surrendered his beloved Son to the agonies of the crucifixion. Legions of angels witnessed the humiliation and soul anguish of the Son of God, but were not permitted to interpose as in the case of Isaac. No voice was heard to stay the sacrifice. God's dear Son, the world's Redeemer, was insulted, mocked at, derided, and tortured until he bowed his head in death. What greater proof can the Infinite One give us of his divine love and pity? He that spared not his own Son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? The meager conception that many have of the worth of the soul and the sacrifice of God's dear Son for sinful man is shown by their work. Should God speak to them as he did to Abraham, sacrifice your possessions, the temporal benefits that I have lent you to advance my cause, they would look in astonishment, thinking God did not mean just what he said. Their riches are as dear to them as their children. Their worldly treasures is their Isaac. To honor God with their substance, they think is a requirement altogether too great, and they cannot believe that God means it. What have this class sacrificed for God? Many men will show all the faith they have if God should speak to them and command them to offer one of their beloved children. They would think him a hard master, yet he has done more than this for them. No such command will come to test and prove them. God knew to whom he spake when he gave the command to faithful Abraham. The patriarch knew that it was God who had commanded and that his promise were infallible. Had the Lord directed him to offer his gold, his silver, his flocks, or even his own life, he would have done so cheerfully. He would have felt that he was but yielding back to God that which belonged to him. But there are many who know not what self-denial or sacrifice or devotion to God is. They can never have time, they can never have extended and elevated views of the infinite sacrifice made by the Son of God to save a ruined world until they surrender all to him. If he should speak to them in a command, as he did to Abraham, they would not be enough acquainted with his voice to understand that he did really require something of them to show their love and genuineness of their faith. The claims of God upon our love, affection, and possession, our talents and our lives, ourselves are correspondingly great, as was the infinite sacrifice made in giving his Son to die for sinful man. Those who really appreciate the work of the atonement, those who have a high sense of the sacrifice which God has made to exalt them to his throne, will count it a special honor to be partakers with him in self-denial, sacrifice, and suffering, that they may be co-workers with him in saving souls. There are many who profess the truth, who do not love God half so well as they love the world. God is testing and proving them. The love of the world and the riches darken their minds perhaps their judgment and hardened their hearts. God has, so some of them at least, revealed his will and called for a surrender of their Isaac to him, but they refused to obey and let golden opportunities pass. Precious time is bearing into eternity a record of duties unfulfilled and of positive neglect. Nothing we have is of true value until it is surrendered to God. The talents of means devoted to the cause and the work of God is of tenfold more value than it selfishly retained for the gratification of our own pleasure. The faith of the devoted martyrs was like that of Abraham. It was genuine. They valued the precious truth, and in their turn, all those despised of men, hunted from place to place, persecuted, afflicted, and tormented, they were valued of God. There was no place for them upon the earth, but of them, says the apostles, the world was not worthy. Those who clung to the truth in face of prison, torture, and death had faith that few now possess. Many have chosen a life of ease. They have exalted their earthly interests above the spiritual and eternal. They neglect to learn the hard lesson of self denial and of surrendering all to God. They do not count anything interesting save that which is learned without much effort and without involving any sacrifice of temporal enjoyment. And it is forgotten as soon as learned because it costs them nothing. The deepest poverty with God's blessing is better than houses and lands and any amount of earthly treasures without it. God's blessings place value on everything we possess. But if we have the whole world without his blessing, we are indeed as poor as the beggar, for we can take nothing with us into the next world. Those who profess to be looking for the soon coming of our Savior, should have Abrahamic faith, a faith that is valued because it has cost them something, a faith that works by love and purifies the soul. The example of Abraham is left on record for us, upon whom the ends of the world have come. We must believe that God is in honest with us and that he is not to be trifled with. He means what he says and requires of us implicit faith and willing obedience. Then will he let his light shine around about us, as we shall be all light in the Lord.